second breakfast live for NeurIPS. I was not going to have us record a show this morning because it is 6:30 in San Diego, but the national security strategy dropped yesterday, and it was such a curious document that we felt we had to get the gang together, Tony and Justin dialing in from the East Coast. All right, Tony, give us the 101 on on what a national security strategy is, and then we're all going to have to go around and say one nice thing about it.
Great. So there are three major U.S. government strategy documents from the national security perspective. There's the going from least important to most important, or least visible to most visible. I shouldn't say important. Is the national military strategy, which specifically applies to the uniformed services, and is also the thing that, like, outside of the Joint Staff, nobody really pays attention to. Then there's the national defense strategy, which is kind of the Pentagon's whole document. It also applies to other elements of national security in some ways, usually. It's also like the document that everybody cares about most because it's not a political document, but it is a cabinet secretary level document. Usually these things it takes anywhere from 6 months to 18 months to develop, get everybody to sign on to it, et cetera, and then publish. It is mandated by law that you publish one. I think it's every 4 years, and then it's within the first year or year and a half of an administration. They give them a little bit extra time. And so this is written at what you would call an action officer level. So i.e. like basically GS employees, usually field grade officers, contractors, folks from think tanks. And then that gets passed up to, the deputy assistant secretary level, in OSD, then assistant secretary, their equivalents, which are 3-star equivalents, and then the commands and, undersecretary, et cetera. Then there's the national security strategy, which is historically the most political document because it comes out of the White House and not the Pentagon. It's more of a guiding image where it takes all of the elements of power, everything that the White House and company care about and that they want to take care of in the next few years. Also, historically, this is also like the blandest document in public because one covers so much and because it's more of a, as I said, political thing than just a defense thing. And then that's a bipartisan statement. And so last night we got the national security strategy released, which is the Trump administration's first strategy document to come out. I know the NDS has been done for a while, but I imagine they were probably waiting for this to get published first. With that being said, I'll say it's, I guess, printed on really nice paper. You know what? It's not excessively long. Like it is actually at 29 pages, probably the correct length for a national strategy document to be released in public. Usually there's non-public things, classified things, that are like annexes and stuff. But yeah, at 29 pages, this is probably the correct length for a document.
Yeah. Yeah. It, in some cases, correctly has a leading focus on economic reindustrialization, re-energizing the defense industrial base, things that we've talked about on here. I think that it's put kind of forward in its answers section, but yeah,
no buts.
Sorry,
come on,
and that's good, and that's where we need, and that is where a lot of the focus needs to be.
All right, I will say that I think it is nice having very straightforward questions. Like the sort of like Q&A rhythm of it is kind of interesting, provocative. It's focused, like there's a whole section 2. What should the United States want? What do we want overall? What do we want in and from the world? I mean, it's very straightforward about how transactional it's going to be. I think there's very little artifice in this. And so, what you get is what you see.
Yeah. And I actually will admit that, like, if I was to frame a strategy document from a content perspective, not the content itself in this one, but if I was saying, like, this is how I want to lay it out to the American people, that is actually how I would do it. I would say, this is what we want. This is why we have a strategy. What are the ends, ways, and means? What does that mean? And it's written in a way that, like, most people could read it and broadly understand what it's asking, right? I didn't catch a whole lot of buzzwords. Now that was replaced with things that are not great,
I
but
asked,
yeah.
I asked, that was clearly like a conscious choice, right? To make this a more accessible political, like, document that people outside of like policy schools can read and grok.
It doesn't nuance and parse language. There are some things in it that I think like adversaries are going to glom onto. Like there was a comment in there about the necessity of securing borders, and it basically said any country that thinks that it is sovereign has the right to exercise its borders within its rights. And it's like, man, I wonder who is going to glom onto
Yeah.
that and think that that's a great comment. Probably both the PRC and Russia, right? Like, so there was definitely some nuance that I would say is lacking that would have been included in other administrations strictly because, well, you don't want to say that because if you say that, that's basically saying we agree with the Chinese position or that we agree with the Russian position.
Yeah, and I'll say that from the China perspective first, of like, there are, it in no way changes policy towards Taiwan. So if anybody tells you this changes policy towards Taiwan, no, it does not. However, it does give lawfare and political means for the PRC to say, but you said this. You didn't change your policy, but you said you would not interfere in the internal affairs of others. You have these principles of non-interventionism. And at the same time, you say that sometimes we do have to intervene. So there is some like talking out of both sides of your mouth of like, basically, we reserve the right to do whatever we want. I think that that entire section can be summarized where it talks about flexible realism and everything else.
Yeah.
It's whatever is convenient, which, yes, I mean, in practice, that is historically the assessment of American foreign policy, which is we reserve the right to do whatever we want. Just because that's what we do in practice does not mean that's what we should aspire to.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think too. There's a good argument. I mean, like, I didn't dislike the fact that it laid out at the very beginning that there's this whole in ways and means discussion, but like, that's not the only school of thought on how to address strategy, and it's a very linear school of thought. Like
Yeah.
that is very much in the military, like because you're making military decisions. That's very much how you do this. For a national strategy, generally you peel up a layer and you say, well, we can be a little bit more pragmatic, we can be a little bit more flexible, and because we control all of the resources, we can decide something is so important that we will marshal and push resources into that then mean the ends ways and means it kind of goes out the window because like, oh, we'll fix it, we'll change it.
Yeah.
And I think that was an interesting approach.
I
Well,
will say, you go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like doing the ends. This is like a fundamental theme of this Trump administration is like, how weak do they think America really is, right? And if you are reducing American power down to ends, ways, and means, I mean, in a military context, it makes sense. You can count up the number of battalions, the number of ships you have, and then you do a little equation, and like that's how many wars you can fight at any given time, right? Like marshaling American power to like achieve economic and national security ends like is very elastic, right? And the more a president cares about something, the more they can convince Congress, the more they can convince companies and the American people. Like those means can become drastically larger than they were before sort of the nation decides that this is a thing that wants to happen. And so, you know, kind of like defining down the goals is, I guess, interesting, I guess, but it's like those goals can and will change over the next 3 years. And the sort of, I mean, we just saw this with the border stuff over the past year. Is like the Trump, like the Biden administration didn't care all that much. The Trump administration cared way more. They got a lot of money from Congress. And now we have all these ICE people running around and we're like, you know, doing Sicario and all across Latin America. So it's like, you know, it wasn't like there weren't resources available to make a Biden corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. It's just that wasn't the priority. So then the means didn't exist, and now they do. And I think that applies to like all of the other regions as well. But sort of the mindset of just saying we can't do this because we don't have the sort of capabilities available today is a really limited way of thinking about how America can shape the world.
Yeah, and I'll say that, like, of the elements of national power, right? This document primarily focuses on military force, and economics, which is frankly what most of them do. Like that is not unique in any way. However, I will say that I've not seen a budget that aligns to this. I don't think we will see a budget that aligns to this. It does simultaneously say that we have to emphasize deterrence in the Indo-Pacific, and it also says that we need to realign our global, not we need to take from Europe to Latin America, which is, you know, that's pretty much what we assume is going to happen, right? It's we need to realign our global military posture to focus on West Hem, and that is, I mean, if you are, I hate when people only refer critiques of the strategy documents to our allies because, like, hey guys, like, you're kind of missing the point. It matters for us too. But yeah, if you are our allies, I mean, the Germans have to be, not that I care, but like have to be wildly pissed about some of the things that are said about them in there. Um, and then, you have
Yeah.
our allies in Asia where it basically says they need to do more. They have been doing more. I mean, that is actually a success of the first Trump administration, was getting our allies to do more, and then the Biden administration building upon it. So I mean, saying that broadly is like, a constant talking point, but like if you actually go out there and assess, it's like they are. I mean, Japan's talking about exporting weapons for the first time.
Not only that, when they have made what I would have considered statements that we want them to make, like Takaishi saying that, a war over Taiwan, PRC or PLA incursion into Taiwan would be a national security threat to Japan. The administration was first silent, and then it seems, based on the reporting last week of whoever initiated the call, whether it was Xi or Trump and all the conflation there, but like, they did not go to bat and be like, "Well, yeah, obviously this is important to Japan." It was like, "Hey, like let's calm it down." And it's like, again, like, do you want them to spend more on defense and like have more of a defense mind and care about their own security more, or do you want them to uh not do that because it's
Yeah,
where
I
you're
mean,
leaning?
we have this. Well, let's just do some reading from scripture here. A favorable conventional military balance remains an essential component of strategic competition. There is rightly much focus on Taiwan, partly because of Taiwan's dominance of semiconductor production, but mostly because Taiwan provides direct access to the second island chain and splits the Northeast and Southeast Asia into two distinct theaters. Hence, preserving a conflict over Taiwan, ideally by preserving military overmatch, is a priority. We will also maintain our long-standing declaratory policy on Taiwan, meaning that the United States does not support any unilateral change to the status quo in the Taiwan Strait. So, yeah, like, you would read that and think that it might be a nice thing for Japan to sort of step up and, like, make that, like, their part of the deterrence equation more transparent. I don't know. Well, I mean, this comes to a broader question of just like how seriously, like, are any of these documents like worth taking all
So
that seriously?
I'll say this because this was I wish Eric was here for another briefcase carrier rant, but I'll say a particular gripe of mine in the 2010s was that you would hear from these national security people, and I don't mean like the fringe national security people who, like, we'll ignore them for a second, but like wholesale national security people who are in the know, in these in groups, right, go to the parties, etc., who would say like, oh, the strategy documents don't matter. And that is such a clear indicator that either you haven't written a good strategy document or you have not been able to marshal the resources and people to execute. Because there have been times where I have had to beat somebody over the head with a strategy document, metaphorically. I mean, now is that part of the problem? Is that people don't read them? I can say that I've been in meetings with theater level commands where they've been like, "Hey, where are you quoting this stuff from?" And it's like, the National Defense Strategy. Can you send us that? It's public.
No, we meant the classified annex, Tony. We meant we've read the one that they released in
This
the
the
public.
super secret one that,
Yeah.
that also wasn't totally distributed to your command because
Exactly. So the issue, and I think you're right, Jordan, like, it doesn't matter because not only is there not a robust national security apparatus any longer? At least with this administration, it kind of goes with the president is the decision maker, and because he's a decision maker, he has consolidated his council to a much smaller degree than it existed in the past. But I do think you also run into an issue with the document itself kind of argues against things the president has done. Like in the case where it talks specifically about like deterring, very clearly it's talking about China, propaganda in the United States against American citizens. TikTok still exists. As we saw when XAI, or whatever we're calling X today, turned on its like filter, so where you could see where accounts came from, Mongolian accounts aren't actually Mongolian. Uyghur accounts are actually from mainland China in Beijing. You've got people running VPNs that are, pro MAGA accounts that are running out of India and China, talking to the United States, talking to people in the United States. Well, where was the action on any of those things? Like we wanted to keep TikTok. We didn't. I haven't heard anybody say anything about like, okay, we're going to get X to shut off these accounts that we know are pumping propaganda into the United States. But again, clearly it's in the document.
Yeah, I think that's. I mean, so at a certain level, any administration has this problem: is that the strategy is inconsistent with how the political element chooses to behave, because that is the nature of a democracy, and frankly, not even a democracy. That is frankly the definition of any government worldwide, right? But yeah, there are these fundamental things where they are using the language of national security elements of the last 5 to 10 years in a much different manner, and that's how you get to it. We're opposed to disinformation. And then it's like, well, what is the disinformation? Well, the concept of de-radicalization and protecting our democracy, which are real quotes from that document, that protecting our democracy is a fake guise, basically. And that is wild. The fact that is in there, and then, from a foreign policy perspective, you see things where, we focus too much on projecting liberal. I don't know if they're talking about big L or small L liberal ideology into Africa. It probably applies to both.
Let's assume it's both. Yeah.
But like, come on, like that is the fact that in the national security strategy of the United States, it says the phrase "protecting our democracy" is a ruse, right? That is insane. And I think like, when it comes to, well, what parts of a strategy document matter, it's the stuff that's different from the strategies before. And some of the strategies before were not so great. I admit that. I've critiqued it. But this, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, like the whole point on China, I think, and it has a large portion. Like, if it enacted a lot of the steps that it lists in the document, that'd be great. I'd be all for it. But it's the cognitive dissonance that between what our actions are and then what this document says that is troubling.
Yeah. Like we had in the AI action plan 6 months ago, lots of interesting language about new semiconductor export controls on semiconductor manufacturing equipment. And that's not happening because currently it is Stephen Miller's job, as tasked by Besant, who was upset with an FT article that came out talking about Alibaba working with the PLA, to make sure that nothing comes out of the government that would make China upset. His Twitter headline banner is him like shaking hands with Xi. So we have that on the one hand, and then we have these documents that come out that say, oh yeah, we need to like maintain military overmatch or whatnot, which is, anyways, like, look, you can draw a line which sort of makes those two resonant, that, oh yeah, like we want to keep the economic relationship like cool as we build up our military forces and reindustrialize, whatever. Like, okay, maybe, but that doesn't also mean that you have to do all this like sovereignty language, which like you could probably copy paste out of some Putin strategy document.
It is. It's also just very undergraduate, and I don't mean that in a again. One of the things about when I write is that I want to speak to a wider audience, so I'm not critiquing it not using over academic language. What I mean when I say undergraduate is that the concepts are very much like if you asked an undergrad to write a paper about what a national strategy would look like, you'd probably get this. I don't know at what university, but you would.
UT Austin.
The bullets, man.
Yeah.
Like the 14 bullets with each sentence is like 7 words.
Yeah.
And again, so what does this mean? I mean, a lot of this is not different language than the administration has used in other places. So like, I don't think anyone should be shocked from that perspective. People are clutching their pearls of like, oh my God, it's consistent. What I would say is different is that this is the first document to come out that when you have these bureaucratic fights that people can leverage to say, but this is the guidance. And, in singular arguments, it doesn't matter much, but over time it does. Now, when the NDS comes out, that's really it. I will say somebody who helped write the NDS did text me last night and said, well, they set the bar low, so this is great for us.
I mean, they're pragmatic and realist, right? The thing that was most troubling to me was the trad language towards the end of some of the paragraphs, which kind of was reminiscent of like the.
Let's read it out. I want to hear it from you, Justin.
We got to Finally, we want the restoration and reinvigoration of American spiritual and cultural health, without which the long-term security is impossible. We want an America that cherishes its past glories and its heroes, and optimistic that they will leave their country to the next generation better than they found it. We want a gainfully employed citizenry with no one sitting on the sidelines, who will take satisfaction from knowing that their work is essential to the prosperity of our nation and to the well-being of individuals and families. This cannot be accomplished without growing numbers of strong, traditional families that raise healthy children.
And we will use every means to protect our precious bodily fluids.
So wait. So if you're raising a disabled child, like if your child is sick, if they have a fever, then you are not being part of the American cultural, spiritual health restoration. Oh my God!
I mean that is what RFK is, and I say this. I don't mean this to be like that is basically what RFK said, was that if your kid's sick, like that's not a good contribution to society, right?
Yeah, the miasmas are off or whatever. His non-germ theory medicine that he doesn't practice.
Yeah, the midichlorians or whatever the Star Wars.
Whatever. But no, it's one of those things where it's like, that is very reminiscent of language that you do see in Putin, or that you see with the one-child policy, the 2-child policy, the 3-child policy in China. Like, that is literally the exact language, the exact type of language that Xi and Putin use to talk about the reason that more kids, more families, traditional roles. Reading Dan Wang's Breakneck, like the entire section on the 1-child policy, and then the reaction post the 1-child policy is heartbreaking if you have children. But it's also like, man, that's some similar language to what was said in Deng Xiaoping's era.
Exactly. And so again, with this, like, in a more reasonable era, you might say there would be 10 articles written about, what does this mean? How is the government going to get after people having more kids? And now it's like, I don't ever want to read that. I don't want to, like, and a lot of this stuff. So a little bit of history here for people. After COVID and, the China Rising thing really became a thing that wasn't just in the background in 21, 22. There became a lot of discussions in national security circles about like, well, we are numerically outmatched. We're solving that with robots, frankly. But like it became a thing for these people to latch onto of that trad stuff of like, well, the way we won was by doing all of that. And it's like, that's not how we won. It was partially a little thing called Skunk Works, and it was also called the Soviet mismanagement of their own economy. The point being that this is not the first time I've seen this come up in national security circles. So it's not just a sudden domestic import of thought. I'll also say the other thing usually is protecting our food. I'm surprised that actually didn't make it in there. People are there's this concern about food supply. And to quote a former coworker of mine, we have Buffalo Wild Wings and the Chinese don't. I think we're okay.
That'd be a great cultural export. I think that's what the world needs.
You're gonna get comments and be like, nope. There's a B-dubs. There's a B-dubs in Shanghai.
There's B-dubs in Beijing. I'm sure there's definitely one in Taipei. I've been there.
Or do they all right, side note, like side quest, do they have different food, or is it universal?
It's basically universal. I mean, it's just like when you go to McDonald's in Japan, right? It's better. Like, it's just because for whatever reason, the same thing. Like, the food was better. We went and watched a soccer game or something. I forget what we did, but we went over there and watched something. Yeah, and it was good. Like,
See, we're another American cultural victory. Like, there's, we don't need to change anything.
yeah,
I
you can go
copy-
watch a baseball game. You can go get Buffalo Wild Wings. You can do all that in downtown Taipei.
There is go ahead.
No.
There is a former professor of mine at American University, Justin Jacobs. I don't know if he's still there, but during COVID, he recorded all of his lectures on Spotify. So you can listen to all of these extremely good history of China, history of Japan lectures. And he has this entire episode on why Taiwan does baseball and the mainland does not. And it talks about, both because of the Japanese occupation, and then also going into like the differences in Confucian culture and what they promoted in terms of what masculinity looked like. It's very good. Everyone should actually go and find that. You should listen to the whole series. That man taught me more about the history of East Asia than anything else. But yeah.
All right. We'll put it in the show notes.
Yeah.
I copy pasted that paragraph into Gemini. I asked, what other regimes does it remind you of? Number 1, Vichy France. Number 2, fascist Italy. Number 3, contemporary Hungary. So yeah.
I wonder what Grok would say. No.
All right. Well, stick around to the end of the show. We'll get the answer to that. All right. Let's talk second strike. Justin, you wrote an article on it. What do you think about this?
Yeah, so I tried to divorce myself. Like, obviously I don't know what happened in the strike cell when they were running it. So I tried to write an article that just kind of laid out, hopefully clarify a little bit of some of the language that people are using around this, and then just kind of give like, hey, in my experience, which is an N of 1, and I understand that, this is kind of how strikes work. So very early on, after the September strike came out, it came out that Secretary Hegseth was the TEA. So he was the Target Engagement Authority. Generally, that's a task force commander or a designee of the task force commander who is vested with the authority to approve strikes. And people hear that and it sounds very convoluted, but largely the way it would array is you have status-based strikes, which is a person is a known bad guy, but they're not actively doing bad guy stuff. And then you have action-based strikes, which are bad guys are doing bad guy stuff that threatens good guys. Obviously, the bar for number 2 is relatively lower, but there are still things we call collateral damage estimates, and you have to use proportionality, and you have to abide by the principles and law of war, and you still have to you can't do undue damage or cause suffering or target protected sites with those. The status-based strike is, to me, what these strikes in the Caribbean have to be. Until they get to a certain area where they're like actually threatening Americans, right? So if it's a status-based strike, that means it has to be approved by a TEA, and there has to be a briefing. Generally, the way that would work is there would be some amount of, they call it soak, where you are watching the target, building, person, whatever. You're building a pattern of life. You're doing slant counts, which are men, women, and children. And the reason you do that is because if you have a slant count that's unfavorable, and that means there are women and children that are in it, you don't conduct the strike. All of that then gets fed by a ground force commander or a strike cell commander in a briefing to a target engagement authority. And it is incredibly detailed, the briefing that'll go in. It'll say, hey, sir, I want to direct your attention to name the sensor. And you'll say, hey, it's under this UAV. And they'll be under this UAV, we have target X. And under the last 48 hours of observation, we have X number of reports of his cell phone or radio or whatever through signals collection that are co-located with him. We've had a high slant at his location of 411, but currently it's a 100. So it's one human. We know who it is. We've been watching it for 48 hours. And over the next amount of time, we have X amount of green space that we can conduct this strike without collateral damage. This is how we're going to weaponeer the strike that we're going to conduct. This is how we're going to ensure that we keep collateral damage to the absolute minimum that we can to only affect that person and or building and or vehicle or whatever it is, pending your questions. And then the TEA will either approve, disapprove, ask for additional clarification, and he will give remarks and restrictions to include re-engagement authority. So he'll run through his entire list of everything, and then he will sit there and watch the strike because he has now signed on the dotted line that he is the target engagement authority. So the first thing that was weird was they came out and they said Secretary Hegseth was the target engagement authority for these strikes. And then we had a strike that occurred on a narco boat. I'm just gonna assume everything is exactly the way we said it. Strike occurs, doesn't sink the vessel, but it starts to sink the vessel, and there's 2 apparently clear survivors. Then after 41 minutes, there is a re-engagement. That is a very long time for a re-engagement to occur, which in my mind indicates that there is a lot of discussion going on between the various stakeholders about if you're allowed to re-engage. Probably also to include like watching the vessel sink and like seeing like, oh, like, it's not going down, shit. Like, what are we going to do? The fact that the TEA left after the strike is important because like you've already signed off. Conceivably, you've given your remarks and restrictions to include re-engagement. So if you've already signed that off and now you're not watching it, it doesn't actually really matter. Like, yes, the commanders below you have a moral, legal, and ethical responsibility to act in a moral, legal, and ethical way, but you have already signed up for whatever the next thing is if you've given clearance to do whatever. So when you say something like, kill them all, if that's in your remarks that you have made as the TEA, technically you've signed up for that. Like whatever happens next, you signed up for because you said as the target engagement authority, my intent is for all of them to be dead.
Yeah, and so I'll say 2 things on this. One of which is that like this is an ownership thing, and I am sure that is a conversation that is being had amongst people right now of like, is this a valid representation of what ownership looks like from a leadership perspective? However that played out, right? I would also say that, for folks who, again, think that sounds very complicated, let me give you a simpler translation here of when you are trained in the U.S. Army Infantry and you are dumb and you are young and have just been given a rifle 10 weeks earlier, you are taught when you clear the objective that if you walk past a wounded or surrendering enemy, they are, for all intents and purposes, under your care. You do not get to then swing around and pop them in the back of the head. Like now, if you're still facing forward towards them, there's a little bit more room, right? Because then you're still facing them. It's still, you have best observation, right? You have not yet trusted them to put your back towards them, right? Now you might be like, that sounds stupid. You have to teach somebody who has a high school level education at best what it means to not do war crimes. And like that is therefore the basic line that is given, right? Every officer is taught this in ROTC or whatever the equivalent is for West Point and OCS, right? Because every officer is taught basic infantry tactics, which means everyone knows that like you have like there is a time when you engage a target and there's a time where it's okay, now they're under my care, I have to deal with this. And I say that because that means that every officer in that room or former officer in that room, no matter their pedigree, has been told the exact same thing. And so before you even get into the legalese of, when you start talking about like, well, was there, the law, the law of the sea, et cetera. These are the basics. And sitting around if I'm sitting around on the objective for 41 minutes, being like, that guy over there, I don't know, he's bleeding out, but maybe we should just, like that's cartoonish, frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like I said, like, like I kind of talked about it in my piece a little bit, but one of the task force commanders I worked for at one point, and he pissed off a lot of guys that were junior to him, strike desk guys and like captains in special forces. But he's a 06. He's not anymore. He's a 2-star now. But he was he got asked for a strike. There was a mosque that was very clearly being used as a staging location. Kurds were getting close to the mosque. In the next day or so, they were going to take it over. And they were at one point, I think the high slant was in the 60s. So like 60-0-0, like a lot of bad guys pulling weapons out of this mosque and like trying to move them further away from where the line of troops were coming and congregating. And everybody was all excited about it. And this guy sits down and he's just like, hey guys, I get it. Like, I get what you're saying. He's like, we're going to own that terrain in the next day. And the negative repercussions for this greatly outweigh the positive benefit that could potentially come for doing this. He's like, and I have not seen something that shows that it is so imminent of a threat to our forces or to our partner forces that I need to take that ancillary or that secondary risk. So he didn't authorize the strike against it. And there are really interesting conversations that come up when you think about stuff like this, because like, you talk about action-based versus status-based targeting. If a person is within a kilometer or two of the FLOT, the forward line of troops, and is running towards them or driving towards them and has weapons, like that's very clearly a status-based target. What about a radio operator who is 15 kilometers away from the FLOT, who is just transmitting instructions, but is also in like a civilian area inside of a building that you don't have really good eyes on? Those are really nuanced questions that like we had a lot of conversations about, and how we were going to define if it was a valid strike or if it wasn't a valid strike, or how we would have to go about doing the strikes. And I will say a lot of those commanders hedge towards, man, if you don't have active intercepts saying that they are talking on these high terror radios and saying, we are going to kill the Americans right now, like we need to move the VBID up. He's like, then like, don't even work, because you don't know what else is in that building. And you would even have things like very clearly bad guys who were talking on the radio. And when you would finally get radio intercepts from them, it would be a child that was speaking on the radio. The dad would be in the room, or the adult would be in the room telling them what to say, but it would be a child that would be talking on the radio, because they were trying to make sure that like you knew there was a child in that building. Again, it is not pretty. It is warfare. And like I make a lot of allowances for like things that happen in the heat of the moment, but there is a line where as a commander, you have to be able to step 1 or 2 levels back and be like, okay, I am not under threat. I can look at the entire picture and I can say, yes, I understand the short-term military benefit of this, but there are these longer repercussions that have to be considered. And I mean, right now we're already seeing it, right?
Exactly. And like, this is like, again, from a judgment perspective, if the Secretary of Defense is the person doing this, I mean, like, what is going to happen to this mission now? Look, clearly the idea of this was to look tough, to scare drug dealers, to sort of make it clear that like taking stuff by boats into America is something that your risk benefit calculus was going to radically shift by publicizing this, by memeing over it and whatnot. But like, the impact of this second strike is going to be, this guy might lose his job. There's going to be an enormous amount of sort of like the amount of congressional focus and oversight on this campaign, which we were talking about was like surprisingly muted over the past few months, is now going to be turned up to 10 and is not going to turn down anytime soon, because there is an enormous amount of like political grist to be made of something that, I think if most Americans read that article would find extremely uncomfortable. And so like, yeah, the juice was absolutely not worth the squeeze of taking these 2 dudes who were, clinging on for dear life and trying to tell the American people that they were like a grave threat to America, or apparently that they were going to like take the drugs back to the island. I mean, I don't know. It's going to be an enormous mess. This is like war crimes aside, this is like an enormously dumb political decision, which is going to have severe repercussions for trying to like do this campaign that you set out to do over the past few months.
Yep. And so I'll say from the congressional perspective, you brought up a good point, right? Of that Congress was fairly mute about this. Now, obviously there was, I think for the Dems, there's a lot on the base who are like, anything involving this is, blatantly illegal. And again, I'm not a lawyer, although I can look at the Constitution. I will probably say though, that like from a political perspective, like most of the country does not care if drug traffickers die. Like that is a blatant thing. Now that does not mean you act on that. Most people don't care if murderers die either. You don't execute people in the streets, right? Like the rule of law, right? The society demands that we, behave better than our animal instincts, right? Um, I will say though that once you've woken up Haskin-Saskin, there are certain things that Congress hates: being lied to, having their funds misused, and having their powers taken away. Now, Congress has, as I've written previously, like has abdicated some of its responsibility here for war powers, et cetera, over time, particularly when it comes to these sorts of campaigns. Once Hask and Sask have your hooks in you, it's going to be very hard, especially going into midterms, to let this go. And now this is going to tie up everything you want about, let's say, if you do want to redo your budget to align with the national security strategy. Well, now you're going to have to deal with all these NDAA items about restricting your authority based on all these things. And, maybe 6 months ago, people were more comfortable with the idea of like, nobody's going to come after us. I think a lot more people are concerned, that people would come after you if you do crimes. And so or if there's the perception that you're doing that. If you're a congressional staffer and you're looking at this, if you're the PSM reviewing the report or whatever, I mean, you're going to want to talk to everybody. And it's going to be really hard for them to just step away from this cleanly. I don't know what that looks like in terms of having a sacrificial lamb or not, or if it does require a change at the cabinet secretary level. I don't think that's going to happen. I know there's been talk about changes. I think the Senate is not in a position to validate a new SecDef, SecWar. So I think everyone here is kind of caught in a weird like Spider-Man meme of like, well, shit, what do we do next? We don't have the power to change this, but we can make it painful. We're still going to do this, but we're going to be in pain. I don't know what comes next.
Yeah, I would just like kind of doubling down on the decision making within the Department of Defense, Department of War. The idea that the Secretary of Defense would be the decision maker becomes more problematic too when you start thinking about like, okay, now who's the impartial jury who can like, because if he's not the decision maker, let's say he wasn't the decision maker and it was just Bradley. He said, this is a SOCOM mission. I'm making the SOCOM commander the task force commander. He is going to have all authority. And then there was a question. Well, then it goes to the Secretary of Defense and he reviews it and he goes, based on my council of colonels and X, Y, and Z, I find no malfeasance. Like I absolve Mitch Bradley of whatever he's accused of. Who is the person who can do that within the department now? Because you've made the Secretary of Defense the guy, or he has made himself the guy. He's really abdicated all responsibility that the department can have, which really puts it in a weird, it's a weird position now, because now it's like it goes in front of the Senate. He can't go and stand there and be like, I reviewed as an impartial person everything, and I think X, Y, and Z. Well, you're not impartial.
Just like why would he do it in the first place? Just because like it feels cool and tough, and you can like watch stuff blow up on TV. I mean, what is?
I don't know. So that's the thing too, is like he could have watched it from anywhere. Like I'm going to use the pejorative, but Kill TV, if you have the right access to the right systems, you can watch basically a lot of UAV feeds from a lot of the places that they fly at any given time. The thing that's interesting is, Mitch Bradley was the squadron commander for Dev Group. He was JSOC commander. He was the SOCCENT commander. He is intimately familiar with the way that strike cell operations work, and he knows how those briefings work, and he knows how like that whole process works. Fully qualified to make all of those decisions. He didn't need somebody else to be the TEA. Like, to be honest, he has every qualification that needs to be there. Having him in the room to be like the secondary backup, that doesn't make sense to me either, because it's like, man, you've really wasted, like, you have an officer who that's what he did. Like that is what Mitch Bradley, like, as a dev group commander, as a task force commander, as all the levels of things that he did. From, again, remember, this is a man who was in SEAL Team 6 during the Bin Laden raid. Like this man he's done a lot of things. Very capable. He didn't need the oversight that was leveled over the top of him either. Or maybe he did.
Yeah, I think there's just going to be more stuff that comes out about this. And it's going to be weird going into the holiday of, like, Congress always gets weird about how much they continue their investigations and stuff during that time. But I think one takeaway for the audience of, like, there's this perception of, like, the U.S. military has abdicated its moral responsibilities. That's not true. This is by and large, I mean, you can talk about, and I'll leave it to Justin to talk about, ops in Afghanistan and Iraq. But, like, the idea that the U.S. military, this is somehow their default setting, is not true. Like, just blatantly not true. And so, like, this is a very critical point for the military of what does good order and discipline look like when it comes to, is that okay now, right? Are we about to just, basically roll back the concept of, like, we care about this stuff, because that applies to a bunch of other things. So this is, politics aside, this is a very important period for the military in terms of what it looks like ethically.
Yeah, I mean, like, again, there are always going to be huge gray areas in warfare. One of the things that comes up is the Kunduz province Medical Sans Frontier hospital that was attacked that was attacked during an operation where a third group team and their Afghan partners were being actively attacked. From people who were there, and like, very little chance that they were not being fired at from that hospital. And insurgents do that because hospitals are protected buildings. They know that it is harder for strikes to occur on those buildings, and so they use that to their advantage. And people will get up in arms, and they're like, we're tying the hands of our military by offering these areas of sanctuary. I think that it's kind of one of the things that I prided myself in, and that I prided my service in, is that, like, we are better than them. Like, we're better than the insurgents. And because of that, we can have these higher standards of our behavior. Because there's also kids in those hospitals, and there's also sick people and wounded people and people who are innocent people who are in those hospitals, to include the doctors that were there volunteering and risking their life to provide medical care and treatment. That being said, in those instances where there's these big gray areas and decisions get made, I don't really usually hold a ground force commander who has a very small optic, and all he can see is, my soldiers are being shot at, people that I care about are being wounded, and this is where it is coming from. Like, my action is going to be towards that. There's a ton of grace there. Like, that's understandable. That grace gets degraded as you remove yourself from the imminent danger, and you are sitting in cush leather chairs inside of strike cells where you are very secure and there isn't an imminent threat to life. And that is the problem, again, where this is something that was very messy, that did not need to be very messy, and could have had ample time to develop and actually be a robust of, like, look at what we can do. We have the capability of being incredibly precise. Here is the evidence that these people were drug smugglers, because, again, Secretary Hegseth can declassify that evidence, and he can say, like, hey, here's the declassified evidence. They were drug smugglers, X, Y, and Z. This is the reason we did the strikes. These are all the things. But even then, like, you don't have to do the secondary strike. You don't have to do the follow-up. You don't have to spend 41 minutes debating it after the first strike. All of those things.
I don't know. Yeah. This will not be our last conversation about this strike, I am sure.
No, certainly not. And I will also say that there are folks who, just on the whole ethics of warfare thing, right? There are people who say, well, we didn't used to have to worry about this sort of stuff. There, restrictions are somewhat shaped by culture, and they are also shaped by previous wars, right? There's a reason why you have a lot of laws that come out after World War II, because a lot of people did a lot of heinous shit on the battlefield, not even just off. Um, but like, even to go back to the Civil War, right? Like, there were considerations for, like, how do you talk about treating the wounded? How do you talk about how do you negotiate with the enemy to say, hey, I want to remove my wounded or my dead from the battlefield, right? What does it look? What are valid targets? Has always been a question. And when it was a time centuries upon centuries ago of when what is a valid target, not a question, I would say that we are slightly more evolved than that now. And that is a significant evolution for society.
Well, can we
I'll say
talk?
too. There's also
Yeah.
sorry, I was going to say there's also been a psychological angle for psychological operations, information operations, whatever you want to call it, angle that occurs. If you are going to treat casualties and enemies of war where they're just going to get shot or they're going to be mistreated or they're going to do the baton death march or pick the things that happened during World War II, slave camps, things like that. Nobody's gonna like you engender a will to fight because God damn it, I don't want that to happen to me. That if you are seen as a person who actually exercises humanity with your enemy once you beat them and like you take care of them and things like that, like you can actually get more defections. You can get more people who are going to be willing to like lay down their arms because they know that what's not going to happen is you're not going to come across and try to eat them. Um, there's
Yeah,
a
I mean,
military relevance to that as well.
this like, why is Hegseth Secretary of War today? Because he was on Fox News talking about Eddie Gallagher and how Eddie Gallagher got the short end of a deal when he did some, I think, almost every, I mean, the best, like, where the whole establishment, all of his teammates said he did some really heinous shit. And if that is like your formative, like, professional experience outside of public service is getting really famous for this public campaign, then yeah, you're just learning some really weird and twisted lessons, and applying them into sort of like less and less relevant contexts can lead you to some very dark places. And I think that's really the only way to kind of back your way into what we probably ended up seeing in September. And yeah, it's like it's disgusting. It's also very counterproductive. And I don't think it's like, I don't think this is like a steady state that, like, I think the American people can take a lot, but just like being really proud of something like this and blaring it from the rooftops does not seem like where the US will sort of land here.
Exactly. And to the point about, Congress being quiet, was because, yeah, the American people, like, they didn't care. Like, frankly, it was kind of memeified, as much as gallows humor is. Having to watch and debate this will change public opinion. And as we are rolling into midterms, that is a bad time to try to roll up support for a campaign, a military campaign, right? And I would be, if I was in the seat of, in DOD, of being like, well, how do we prosecute these things? Oh my God, would I be looking for another way to do it? I wouldn't necessarily be like, we can't do it. Because that's a whole other thing entirely.
Yeah.
But I think people would be like, well, can we hit them at the source? Can we hit the production facilities, right? What's the what is something that is either, one, out of the way of the cameras, or two, less legally or morally gray, right? I actually wouldn't be surprised if this goes bad, where they start to try to look for some sort of congressional authorization for something else separate from going after this, right? Because at some point somebody's going to want some coverage, and if
But
Bradley goes,
they won't get it, Tony.
I
There's no
know,
way.
yeah. Well, that's what I'm saying. But if Bradley goes down for this, I think you're going to see a bunch of other people be like, oh, strikes can actually cost me my career. And at some point, you do hit a critical mass of people being like, I'm not risking my career. I'm not risking my family's livelihood, my pension, et cetera, for this. And I think 6 months ago, that was not a consideration people had.
It kind of comes back to the Southcom commander, right? Who retired early. I mean, you know, how much did he see? How much did he hear stuff like kill them all and just decide, you know, I'm just not up for this shit? It makes a lot more sense now.
Yeah.
Than
Has he been called in front of the Hill yet? I know Bradley testified in a classified hearing this week. But I haven't. I am very interested. I think that's the next thing, is to see him testify about this.
No, I agree. I think, that'll be the telling moment when he gets rung up and asked to come speak, because it was around September when he announced that he was going to retire, right? When I'm not going to do my full 2 years, and then so it does. Like, well, the timing there is weird. So,
yeah, and frankly, that was Congress failed in not being like, that's weird. We should ask about that, right? Like that is
normally GCC commanders don't decide halfway into their COCOM command time to be like, I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah, because
especially when their job finally gets interesting and people care about it.
Yeah, if you're a Southcom and you're like, oh my God, I finally have assets. This is fantastic.
Is this what sitcom's been like this whole time? Yeah, exactly. It's funny because they're in Tampa, so they're trying to like just pull sitcom guys to just go fill those roles.
Was there anything else we wanted to talk about?
I gotta hit the road here in a minute. I gotta drive in DC for the snow. So
all right,
good luck.
This was some real Sports Center for action. Oh yeah, we're closing on Grok. I asked it what regimes it reminded, the paragraph from the national security strategy reminded of. Number 1, fascist Italy. Number 2, National Socialist Germany. Number 3, Franco's Spain. Hey. Apparently there was something in fascist Italy called the Battle for Births, a democratic campaign to increase Italian families. Maybe we'll do a little more coverage of that next week.
Huh.
Yeah, that'll really interest our audience.
Yeah.
All right. Enough.
Yeah. All right. Later.
I'm really excited for the AI song I'm going to make from that paragraph. I think it's going to be.
Oh, it's gonna be
no. Set it to show tunes. I actually had somebody ask me about that. They're like, where did that song come from? It's like AI.
All right.
We got a house band. All right, enough. Goodbye.
Finally, we want the restoration and reinvigoration of American spiritual and cultural health, without which long-term security is impossible.
We want an America that cherishes its past glories and its heroes,
and that looks forward to a new golden age. We want a people who are proud, happy, and optimistic that they leave their country to the next generation better than they found it. We want a gainfully employed citizenry with no one sitting on the sidelines who takes satisfaction from knowing that their work is essential to the prosperity of our nation and to the well-being of individuals and families. This cannot be accomplished without growing numbers of strong traditional families that raise healthy children.